we go. All right. Welcome back. We are here again. So, decided to do a thing on The Diary of a Country Priest by George Bernanos, French writer, rather esteemed for this, as well as some other of his works, which I have not read. And I read the translation by Remy Rogeau, which is probably the only translation that's around. And, sorry, I unfortunately have not seen the movie, so this is all going to be about the book. And if you have seen, you said you've seen the film, so if you end up having any cool insights about the film, that feel free to share them. I know the film was directed by um, a very famous French filmmaker, um, whose name is escaping me at the moment, rather shamefully.
Bresson.
Bresson, yes. And I've seen some of his other films, or at least one of his other films. I have not seen that one, unfortunately. But one day, hopefully, it will be back in print and we'll be able to get it again. But in the meantime, Diary of a Country Priest. You read it some time ago. I read it about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Did you have a chance to leaf through it again to refresh your memory or anything like that?
I did. I have spent some time doing that throughout the past week,
Nice.
and I did not read it as carefully as I would have if I were actually reading it properly, but I think I looked at it decently enough to touch on some interesting points and themes for today.
Sure.
Since you mentioned the movie, I did just want to say briefly that The Diary of a Country Priest, the film, and the book together, I think are one of the only examples I know of where I enjoy them both very much, both the novel and the film adaptation.
Oh, good.
Uh, and I can hardly think of anything else I'm familiar with where that's the case. Um,
That's not too surprising considering that the book is very good. I mean, I thought it was awesome when I read it, and the movie's directed by Bresson, who's a master of his craft. Um, so it's good to hear that he does a really good job, but it's also like, yeah, would expect him to at the same time. That's good
right.
to hear, though. I
Yeah. The movie is not so fresh in my memory because I watched it in college, and as you found out for yourself, it's not so easy to get
get
a
a hold
hold of
of.
a
Yeah,
copy of it, or forget a copy. Just it's not. I don't think it's just floating around on the internet either, or at least I haven't found it.
not easily.
Um,
No.
yeah. My point being, it's not fresh in my mind, but I think it's. I think it's a somewhat distilled adaptation, but you were probably expecting that anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a long book, but it's certainly not a short one either. So trying to drop this down into what 90, 100 minutes or so would take a little bit of slimming down, to say the least.
But
But
it's still done very well from what I remember.
good,
I remembered liking it.
cool. All right, so well, I'll let you start because you read this before I did, and like I said, unfortunately I don't have any notes compiled. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants here, but I do have some bookmarks, so hopefully those will be relevant as I can decipher what I was going for when I put the bookmarks in here.
That's all right. I think we can do something good here.
Sure.
So, just to give a little bit of background about the book, or just basic information about the book. So, this is an epistolary novel of sorts. I'm using the term epistolary broadly. It's not. It's not really. It doesn't consist of letters. It consists of the diary of
A
an
country priest.
unnamed. Yes, a diary of an unnamed priest in France, and the novel was written or published in 1937, I think it was. And as far as I can tell, it's meant to be set in the present day. So at that time.
Yep. Interwar period. Yeah. Every
Yeah,
time they refer to the war, which isn't often, but when they refer to the war, they're talking about the First World War.
right. And I must confess, I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the First World War beyond the average thing you would pick up in school. But
Sheer unmitigated disaster.
right, but from what I do know, that's very important context because I gather there was a great deal of civilizational malaise following that conflict in Europe in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely shows in this novel. I would say it's actually one of, if not the primary themes of the book, is that the world the priest inhabits, and perhaps the priest himself to a degree, are suffering deeply, afflicted with the deadly sin known as acedia.
Mm-hmm.
Now, um, that's not really an everyday term, so I will clarify that the better known term for it is sloth, but the word sloth is dripping with connotations that can obscure what is really meant by it. You know, when people hear the word sloth, they think of I'm gonna sleep till noon today, or
Usually a
something like
more,
that.
yeah, physical or material aspect. Sort of a
Right,
slovenly behavior, slovenly dress, sort of uncaring attitude that usually refers to everyday, uh, everyday disregard for personal self care or the care of other people, rather than acedia, which is more of a spiritual thing.
right. Um, but in the Christian tradition, the term usually has more of a spiritual connotation to it, and it's definitely, as I say, it's definitely on display in the book. So um, I'm gonna I want to dig into this just a little bit. So on the very first page of the book, the priest reflects to himself in his diary, "My parish is bored stiff,"
Mm.
he says,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm mentioning that excerpt in particular because I think it very much relates to how acedia is sometimes defined. So let me pull up an excerpt I have here pertaining to that. Um, so defining acedia is tricky because uh, a lot of the words that are used to translate the term in English capture individual facets of it
Mm-hmm.
without capturing the full reality of it. Um, so, as part of this discussion, I'm going to be uh, consulting at a few points a different book, which is very pertinent to this to this novel, I think, and that I would recommend wholeheartedly to anyone listening. It's called The Noonday Devil.
Classic. Yes.
Sub you're familiar with it.
I have not read it, but we've talked about it before. I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Excuse me. So it's subtitled Acedia, The Unnamed Evil of Our Times, published by Ignatius Press, written by Jean Charles Nault, Order of Saint Benedict. Uh, Excellent book. But anyway, I'm bringing it up because the author of this work notes early on. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up here. He says every time we try to translate this term, that being acedia, we lose a bit of its richness. We speak about languor, torpor, despair, laziness, boredom, or disgust, but ultimately none of these words succeeds in rendering the wealth of connotations of the term akadia, that being the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just wanted to mention that particular quotation because you'll notice one of the words he mentions is boredom. And the priest in our novel, right from the start, is speaking of his parish as bored stiff. And then a couple pages later, he says, um, he says the world is suffering from an aborted despair, a shameful form of despair. So it seems to me fairly evident that uh, this this deadly sin is hovering over the novel. Uh, Bernanos does not mention it by that name, but uh, I think it's fairly apparent if you look at those and many other excerpts I could mention, but I'm not going to. But probably the most obvious one, probably the most obvious portion of the book that just fairly broadcasts it to anyone who has eyes to see, is many pages later in the book. You know, the priest tends to go off on all sorts of extended reflections in his diary. You know,
Yes.
he's definitely not just talking about how he went to the store and got groceries that day.
Oh no, it's very much
Um,
written like a diary. He's sharing his innermost thoughts very much, and uh, often ripping pages out toward the second half.
yeah.
We'll get to that, I'm
So
sure.
right. So much later in the book, somewhere in his reflections, he says this: the sin against hope, the deadliest sin, but
Mm,
perhaps also the most cherished,
yes.
the most indulged. It takes a long time to become aware of it, and the sadness which precedes and heralds its advent is so delicious. The richest of all the devil's elixirs is ambrosia. And I am mentioning that excerpt because that, in a nutshell, is how acedia is usually defined,
Yeah.
characterized. Is It's the sin against hope, um, and that's how Nault uh, defines it, or that's how he says Aquinas defines it. Um,
Yeah.
here's what here's what Nault says. He says Aquinas says that someone can flee beatitude in two ways: either because he has a certain disgust with the things of God, fastidium, or else, more subtly, because he thinks that beatitude is very good, but that he is unworthy of it, that it is good for everyone except himself. This is despair in the strictest sense.
I was
It is
about
the
to mention that.
famous
Yeah.
Yes, it is the famous sin against the Holy Spirit. That's what Nault says. Now, please go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, no. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. I feel fine. It's just got some. I have to clear my throat all the time now.
We'll
The
both be doing that.
yeah, the you acedia, not just as a terminal boredom, but it's a terminal boredom as a it's worse than boredom because it's a like a black hole that you just sort of sucks you in a way that despair is. And it's interesting that acedia is able to be a term defining both at the same time, leaning toward despair, which is exactly what Diary of a Country Priest depicts, especially as the I don't know if you'd call it drama, but as the drama unfolds, like it's not really like there's only one particular drama unfolding. There's a couple of things going on in the town at the time, but as the main characters' um, position in the town starts, well, it's already disintegrating at the beginning, but
Yeah,
as it
it's
gets
not good.
worse.
It's not good from the start.
No, yeah, he's not in a very comfortable position from the very beginning. And then as it gets worse and worse, and as his affairs with the parishioners that at least go to mass and presumably donate quite a bit to the church get increasingly worse, and his relationships with everybody else get worse, and through arguably through some fault of his own, but at the same time not. I don't know. I feel a lot of sympathy for the guy. Um, but I think we'll get there. I want to focus more on the acedia aspect for now because that's the topic at the moment. Get into. You mentioned he's unnamed. Is he really unnamed, or did I just miss what his name was?
I'm pretty sure that he's not given a name.
That wouldn't surprise me.
He's just the priest, or rather a priest. I guess it.
Yeah.
I guess it's a good way of conveying that this could be anybody, really.
Um,
Anybody who's takes on this vocation, I should say.
Right. Yeah, because even in the one piece that's not written by the priest, he's not named. It's just referred to as my friend and the priest. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure if he had the chance to tell us, he would just say his name isn't important.
Yeah. 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 So anyway, that's all I was going to mention about Acedia and despair, and also interestingly enough, I may as well just get into some of this now actually, because the you can return to the Acedia part in just a minute, but for the purpose of the book, the character, the priest, has a is ill. He's sick through the entire book, and it's something that recurs through his diary entries over and over again. As he's have a horrible problem keeping food down, to the point where his diet is restricted to more or less bread and wine, and some other things, and especially bad wine that has gone bad, is rather amusing to me. It was supposed to have been rather good wine at one point, apparently, but it has gone rather bad. And as a result of this, he's construed as a drunk, which is not an uncommon thing in this particular part of the world at that period in time. But he gets a reputation for being a drunkard, even though well, I don't think he's a drunkard. But given that this is a diary written in the first person, there is some element of a unreliable speaker going on. The especially because they're like I mentioned before, there are pages torn out of the diary, so you don't really get the totality of the things that he's wrestling with interiorly toward the second half of the book. But despair obviously plays a pretty big role in any drunkard's life, I would expect, because booze is usually one way they try to temper some of that or deal with it. And given that it's a small country town in not quite the middle of nowhere, it is France. Almost nowhere is the middle of nowhere there, but it is removed from everywhere, and there aren't any young men. There's only one young man in the entire novel, other than the priest. You don't get. I get the impression the priest is probably in his late 20s or 30s, but there is the cousin of the girl that gives him all kinds of trouble, who shows up toward the end. It's 3/4 the way through, and he's the only young man, and he's in his mid-20s. He was a some kind of military guy. But yeah,
Yes.
there's no young people at all, except for some kids, and most of the kids are all girls for the most part. At least the ones he makes
Yeah,
mention of.
yeah, there might be one or two other young men, but it's definitely true that they don't figure that prominently
Yeah,
in the story. You're absolutely right that his the characters that he spends most of his time engaging with deeply, at least that he tells us
that he
about,
tells us about, right?
are women.
Women or older men. Yeah,
Yeah.
the other priest that he's got the dean of the college that's breathing down his neck sometimes, and he's got the other priest that he's his confidant, basically, presumably his confessor. The cure,
The Torsi.
Torsi, yes, who was pretty cool. I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
But and then everybody else, everybody ends up talking to is definitely, they're people with kids that are teenagers at least, or presumably in their 40s, 50s. They're all. You just get the impression that the village is old, and not just because the buildings are old, because everybody lives there is over 40, over 45, over 50, probably. They're
Yeah.
either over 50 or their kids are young, and young enough to cause a lot of trouble um, in classes.
Yes, the priest makes a point of once or twice reflecting on how he had previously entertained this naive hope of finding a sort of solace in the children in his catechism class,
Mm-hmm.
which they rudely disabuse him of very quickly.
Real quick, yeah. Yeah. That's real early on, too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um, since you mentioned it before, I do want to say, as I was looking through the book again, uh, I actually was able to appreciate more this time the ambiguity of the priest's character.
Mm-hmm.
When I originally read it and when I watched the movie, uh, I mostly my thoughts were mostly along the lines of, oh, I love this guy, he's great. Uh, I mean, that's still basically my final assessment.
Yeah, same here. I'm very
But
sympathetic
but
to him, but yeah, he's definitely not the most reliable narrator, in my opinion.
yeah, and I was able. I found myself thinking as I was looking through it, and I thought, he really might have some legitimate problems with how he's going about his job.
Yeah, that was my impression
Perhaps
as
some
well.
personal issues.
The uh, so one example I would say for sure is one of the climactic events when he deals with the Mrs. Chantal, the woman who ends up accidentally dying.
I just want to say, just to clarify for anyone listening, I think you mean the Countess. Chantal is her daughter.
That's the Miss Chantal, yes. The Mrs. the Countess, yes. The
Uh, Forgive me if that was a needless correction. I
No,
just
it's fine. It's worth correcting because both of them are important and they're both named the same thing. I don't remember if they're given first names. They probably are, but they're always referred to as by their family name. And the Countess Chantal is older, of course. I don't know exactly how old. I just assume probably mid 40s, maybe closer to 50, but couldn't quite get a grip on that. And then, of course, her daughter uh, is a bit of a troublemaker and a recurring character throughout the book as just a very angry young woman um, who's got it out for the priest, but really just has it out for everybody. Um, and because of the circumstances of her family environment, and none of her circumstances are ever really brought into the light of the narrative. Like a lot of it's implied, some of it is talked about, but it's always talked about in a sort of a rumor way, or you're hearing it only from one person, so you're not really, and there's no uh, objective voice going on in the narrative. Everything's coming from him or as it's been reported to him, and I don't really see any reason to doubt his transcription of dialogue for the most part. Partly as a narrative device, but also because it's so exact. I think if somebody says something, you can kind of trust that that's probably what they said in the story. But
he has a very good memory.
yeah, yeah. Well, he didn't have an iPhone, so the but the Countess ends up. There's this big thing with the Countess, and that all stems from the fact that her daughter's is ballistic, and they're trying to send her off to dormitory. I forget where. It's not in Lille. It's in someplace else. I'm sure I'm. French is not my language, so I really
I
don't know.
think they said they were going to send. Well, I'm muddling the details myself. I feel like boarding school was mentioned somewhere in there,
Yeah.
but then I thought they also mentioned sending her to England for just a few months.
Oh no. Yeah. 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 It was boarding school. I think they were trying. Basically, they were trying to get her out of the house, because she was just just a, running roughshod all over everybody in her life and making her mother's life just horrible to be around. And part of that, as the dialogue between the priest and the mother unfolds, obviously the mom's not really helping things along, but still, Bernanos does a good job at illustrating interfamily, intra-family conflict this way. And sometimes you just got a kid that's hard to control, and other times the kid, you're not helping things. So other times you're making things worse as the parent. Um, and it's a little bit of both. He does a good job depicting that this is a little bit of both. But what I was going to get at was the the priest ends up going to the countess, making a house call, as I guess they used to do back then, and addressing this head on in privately with the countess. And this comes after the her daughter um, had a heart to heart with the priest that may or may not have been totally sincere. I think it was mostly sincere. The her daughter doesn't really ever seem to lie to the priest. Um, I might be wrong on that, but I got the impression she wasn't really willing to lie to the priest. She just didn't like him and just had to, she couldn't help herself but talk to him. And there may have
That's
been,
his That's his assessment anyway. That
it
she's
is,
too proud to lie.
yeah. And I don't know if she's too proud to lie. My impression is that she, for some reason, was unwilling to lie to him. Um, at least in a way that she knew she would be called out for. I think she wanted to save face in front of him, and I don't know if that was exactly pride or probably something else, in my opinion. Just, schoolgirl type of thing. But anyway, she goes to him for not even advice, just to basically tell him that I'm my parents are trying to get rid of me. I'm going nuts. I'm going to kill somebody. And she's got like a suicide note in her letter, but in her pocket, but it's kind of obvious she's not really going to go through with that kind of thing. And so the priest does what I guess any responsible adult might do after discovering this, and goes to her parents or goes to her mom and be like, hey, your daughter's ballistic. And her mother's just like, well, yeah, tell me something I don't know. And then it turns into a very long dialogue between the two that really gets deep into the mom's not even her background, just her personal psyche. And while if this had been a narrative that was told from sort of a third person view, it would be a much different story, because instead what you have is the priest, in my opinion, really going about this all the wrong way. And really just like all guns blazing on this poor girl, this poor woman, the mom, driving her into a corner effectively, and really like ripping apart what she's doing. And she's doing it to herself. She's letting it happen. She could have told him to leave at any time, but she didn't. But people in that kind of position, that's again speaking to Bernanos's realism in the narrative. Like sometimes you just end up in a psychological state. You don't want to do that. You want to have that kind of confessionary position, even though, even by both characters' admission, it was not in a confession. It was not in the form of a confession. He asked her at one point if she wanted to do that at that moment. She declined, so it wasn't considered as a confession. She was going to go to confession the next morning, but then she got out of bed, tripped and hit her head and died. Spoilers for a 80-year-old book, but the really that was the whole point to this diatribe here, was that I don't think he went about dealing with that situation in what was probably most optimal. He considered that himself, although after the exchange, he did seem to be, before he heard the news in the morning, he did seem to be like, everything's going to be great now. Like she's going to go to confession. She's back on the wagon. Everything's great. And I don't know. I didn't really get that read from that. And part of me wonders if she really did just hit her head, but she probably did. She seemed pretty sincere at the end, but I don't know. I don't know if she was broken in the right way or if she was broken in the wrong way from that whole exchange.
Now that's an interesting insinuation I hadn't really considered. Um, Now, I do want to say that it's probably true for outside observers that probably none of us would choose to go about that conversation the way the priest does, where, as you say, he's being quite aggressive.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
Aggressiveness was needed, is the thing. So it's hard to really fault him too much. But anyway, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
at the same time, uh, I genuinely believe it is suggested, at least by the priest's account of it, that uh, the Holy Spirit came upon him actually.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that is, if you believe the priest's account of the many conversations he has with other people and just how he describes himself, a lot of the time he's struggling just to carry a conversation with people
True. Yeah, very true.
for various reasons. Sometimes it has to do with him, sometimes it has to do with them. But there are a handful of occasions in this book where the words just flow,
Mm-hmm.
and he, well, I say that, but even as I say that, he when he's writing in his diary about them after the fact, he says, "Actually, it came out very pathetically and
Yeah.
haltingly, and not nearly as impressive as it looks on paper." But at any rate,
Still, he is
the
under the impression that the message was communicated. Right.
yeah, and he's he's saying he almost doesn't even know what he's saying, but it comes nonetheless, and it just seems to happen at least once or twice in this book that it comes to great effect to the person he's dealing with.
Yeah.
So perhaps we can say both and here that uh, broken tool as he is, God still uses him to the good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And on that note, I apologize if this seems like backtracking
No.
to
No. Go for it.
an earlier part of the discussion, but uh, I think it can still relate somehow. So, talking about broken tools, we started by talking about how the world in this novel is gripped by despair,
Acedia. Yeah.
acedia,
Despair. Right.
and one thing I wanted to mention in connection with that is that uh, one thing I picked up on as I was deliberately looking through this novel again and trying to pick up on key ideas and themes is that the monastic ideal is often invoked throughout the novel
Mm-hmm.
and contrasted with the priests out in the trenches, as it were.
The secular priest. Right.
Yeah, but if there's anything that we find in this novel, it's that the quote unquote regular priests are just as liable to acedia as the monks. And one particular way that is evident for the priest himself is that he, at least, let's say for the first half of the novel at least, he he's pretty consistently despairing of his vocation.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
he's in the sticks. Nobody there really gives a hoot about anything he's trying to do. They don't take him seriously. Uh, and somewhere he says, "Somehow I can never quite believe that God will really employ me to the
Mm.
utmost, make complete use of me as he does of the others."
Yeah.
And he says other things, similar things to the same effect. But the point is, uh, you know, the priest himself, I think, is pretty, as I said, to some degree, in the teeth of this despair.
Oh yeah.
And it's only in the second half of the novel that things start to happen that one could actually point to and say, maybe God actually used me somehow. And that whole exchange between him and the Countess we that you just described and that we talked about a little bit, that's probably the singular example,
Yeah.
the
Definitely the
dramatic,
climactic. Yeah.
yeah, the dramatic climax of the story.
Yeah.
And you know, nobody planned for it, that's for sure. The priest didn't go there to talk about the Countess. He went to talk about the Countess's daughter, and things developed in ways they were not expecting.
And
Conversation did.
yeah, and Bernanos does such a good job with that. Like that's so much like real life, you know. You're just expecting to do one thing, and then suddenly you're knee deep in some conversation that's maybe you didn't exactly sign up for, but yeah, it's out. It's not like it's even out of nowhere either, because all of the elements of that conversation are part of this family's problem, and the priest is dragged into it. He's not just dragged into it. He's brought into it because he's the priest, and he steps up to do what he can as the priest to mitigate whatever the spiritual ailments are going on, and he does a good job stepping up to that. And Bernanos just does like it's yeah, like you said, it's not like he's some it's not depicted like he's a hero going to the mountain to slay the dragon here. He's not, he hasn't girded his loins to go to the Chantel residence to address this thing. It's just like, oh, I'm gonna talk to them about their daughter really quick, and then jet. I gotta leave because I don't want to
The,
deal with it too much. And then the
the
next thing you
priest
know, yeah.
the priest could actually qualify as a classical anti-hero,
Oh, definitely, yeah,
possibly.
yeah,
And related to something. It'll tie together. There is something else you can tell I really dug in on this theme of acedia and how it pervades the novel. One other thing I wanted to mention is that uh, part of what is underlying the priest's difficulty of engaging with his parish, I think, is that um, he's not really what they want him to be. And
no, yeah,
what they want him to be, I think, because this crops up a lot in the novel too, is uh, as part of what it means for the world at large and this parish in particular to be in the teeth of despair. Um, all they really want, apparently, from the church is stability, or the social stability that it encourages, rather.
yeah,
And there's just one excerpt in particular I chose that pertains. The priest, in his diary, reflects to himself, "I wonder what I should become if I resigned myself to the part which many Catholics would have me play. Those that are so preoccupied with social preservation, which really means their own preservation." And a number of characters make remarks to the same effect that clearly show that all they're really expecting from the church writ large and the priest in particular is, you know, just help us all live our lives smoothly and chug along, and
and stay out of the
don't
way.
yes don't try to make waves by actually living like you believe in Christ and all that follows from that. And that's the whole problem. He
Yeah,
does.
yeah,
That is how he lives
and he
and
can't help it.
breathes.
Yeah, and part of that actually plays back into his own past, being someone who was born into like dirt poverty. Where like the floor of poverty, you're looking up at the floor of poverty type of thing. Spending his young childhood, being raised literally behind the bar of a less than reputable establishment while his mom was going out waiting tables or whatever that really meant. Um, and
Yeah, when I was looking at that again, I was starting to think, is there something between the lines here I'm supposed to be noticing?
um, so I'm not. I haven't done any of the background research into what that really means, but I can kind of guess that it's one of those things where it's a. I mean, the bar that he was raised at, he doesn't speak at length on it, but you definitely get the impression it's seedier than seedy. And surely she was just a waitress, but she's a waitress trying to make ends meet. So I'm sure she took some money under the table for all kinds of stuff.
He's
But
got the priest has a bit of a preoccupation with lust throughout the novel too, so one
yeah,
wonders if it's in his
yeah,
background as well.
yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me. Not only do those proclivities tend to stick around generationally, uh, from habits, from seeing things, from being exposed to it at whatever age, but also, if you're someone who listens to what the exorcists say, and some of them tend to be kind of right about this, there are generational preternatural aspects that can infect a bloodline that way. Um,
I should clarify. I my own reading of it is I did not mean to suggest that the priest himself is
no, no, no,
suffering
no,
from
no.
lust, but just that it's on his mind
Yeah,
more than once
it
in
is.
what he observes around him, and I guess probably from his own life story.
My impression of that is based on. I think it's the reason he entertains it is, one, he is a guy. I mean, he's a priest. Two, he was exposed to some of this stuff, this aspect of humanity, probably pretty young. I don't think he was abused or anything like that. I don't get that impression at all. My impression was just that he saw it. At a certain age, before he was a teenager, he probably saw that there were guys looking at his mom or looking at other waitresses in the bar that he was being raised at in ways that were not necessarily appropriate, and he probably maybe had just stumbled in on something now and then because of the nature of where he was living, because he was a kid, not having a choice about the matter. Just like this is a horrible example, but you ever read Watchmen? The comic
No, I
book.
haven't.
All right,
But
you can give it a miss.
I
But
know it a little. I know a little about it.
yeah, the character everybody likes, Rorschach, has an experience where he stumbles in on his mom, with a guy, and it's like that kind of thing. He probably, I don't know if it was his mom or whatever, but in this case, it's just when you're raised in certain environments, you're going to be exposed to certain things, and you're going to see things before you're probably ready to really process them. Um, so that's my impression of his background on this, and then suddenly you're just, that's sort of how you start to process reality going forward. And so, um, in the case of, I did have something bookmarked on that, but I can't find it anymore. I
Well,
got the impression
I
that his it's not like he's particularly preoccupied with lust. I will say, not that you said that he was, but um, my impression is that it's something that's on his mind because of this, and also because, like, there was that one girl in his catechesis class
yes,
that was like
that's right.
spreading
He's
rumors and, like, trying to, like, flirt with him as a joke, and he's just like,
yeah,
dude, like,
he's relating it to his own present circumstances
yeah,
because that's what he's dealing with right now, is what
yeah,
you just described. Uh, his his catechism class. He has to deal with this young girl in particular whom he refers to as precocious in some
precocious,
places,
yeah.
or coquettish in others.
Yeah, yeah. That's the same girl that finds him when he almost dies uh, during the storm, right? When he's
Yeah,
stumbling around, like,
yeah.
visiting the neighbors and stuff, and yeah, he has that episode with his health, and yeah, it's the same girl, right? I thought it was. Um, oh, man, what a scene that was.
Yes, it's true.
But good for her that she saved his life. Anyway, so one of the things I did want to ask what your opinion was. I'm not really sure what mine is. So you have, throughout the entire book, it's introduced relatively early on in, like, the first quarter or so. He has this friend who he was in seminary with, who left the priesthood and was sick and is living out of Lille. And the whole book, he's trying to get there to go catch up, because the man had written to him in correspondence, invited him to come, hang out and catch up on the old times, even though that they weren't super close as friends. They were close enough, but they weren't, like, best buddies or whatever. And then finally, at the end, he finally gets there and sees him, and that's the end of the book, because spoilers, I guess, he dies um, in the same household. But my question is, I don't really have an answer to this so much. Is this entire book, you're given the personality profile, effectively, of this priest, and then you have this counterexample set up. You have many counterexamples set up. One with the doctor who blew his brains out, presumably. That's not totally known, but the guy Del Del Bend. You're
Yeah,
given a counterexample with him compared to the priest. You're given a counterexample with the cure de Torse. Um, Again, probably miss whatever. Who's his mentor, kind of, but he's still a counterexample compared to the priest by all outward appearances. And then, of course, there's this character, Louis. Louis, I don't remember his name now. It's right. No, it's not right here. Darn. It's yeah, Monsieur Louis Defretti. Anyway, um, a counterexample with him, and he's only given one scene. You only see him once at the very end, and he's the guy who left the seminary, went into business, shacked up with some woman who can't even really read, um, and the book ends with him. Uh, what do you think that's about? It's an open-ended question, but this notion of like because you have the death of the priest too, who demands last rites from this guy, even though the guy's I don't remember him explicitly being referred to as having been defrocked, but I mean he left the priesthood, so it's not it, six and one half dozen the other maybe, but it's he wasn't necessarily condemned. Just as like, all right, well you're obviously not operating your priestly faculties because you're not you ran away from it, but there's still what is Bernanos trying to say? What did he mean by this?
That's that's a question I don't have a great answer to.
Yeah, neither do I.
I I'll be honest, as I was thinking again about this book and what's going on in it, I didn't really spare a lot of thought for the character you're talking about. You know, I my honest, my real honest answer is that, at least in my mind, I've treated him as sort of a foil to the titular priest, a
Right.
foil who basically drifts out of the kind of life that the priest suffered so much for clinging tenaciously to.
He is depicted. I think you're right, and he is mentioned in this last chapter that the only chapter he's really shown in. The girl that he's with, that he married, perhaps it's a little ambiguous. Um, that the guy's kind of a sued, not the priest, the DeFreddy here. Um, I,
Yeah,
he like would have he would go on uh, like where is it? Here we go. Sure, it's if it's the best of luck to have no luck, then I'm lucky. She was always telling me. I never heard her complaining. No, no, no. This is not quite the right quote, but basically, there's an extended scene, as you remember, with the girl talking to the priest, and she's not really supposed to be there, um, but because he's made her out to be, a professional, intelligent woman, and it turns out that she's basically, washing floors effectively. Um, and he's trying to educate her into sort of a position of social mobility for some reason while he's doing these business hijinks that don't really work out, but he's also very sick. And I found the parallel between him being very sick and the priest also being very sick relevant and kind of interesting. Um, and you have these two characters who are parallels of each other, foils perhaps, because here's the guy who left the priesthood, who's got the girl, who's still sick. His life isn't really working out too well. And then you've got the priest, who's the priest and is sick, whose life is also not working out too well. And they end up converging at the end of the priest's life. Like I said, I don't really have anything to say about this. I don't really know, haven't really thought through exactly how that all goes together, but that is really cool. That is really interesting.
well, if I may offer my simple interpretation,
Absolutely.
I really think it's just meant to be a comparison that very much favors the protagonist
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
because
definitely.
because and this is why I didn't think too much about the other priest because
He comes across as
pretty
too much of a loser.
well, yes, pretty much everything we hear him say, or at least as the titular priest recounts it, he just uniformly comes across as someone who thinks he's way smarter than he really is.
Yeah.
Uh, he's his whole air is of someone who thinks he's risen above his what he now takes to be his more limited and provincial outlook on life, and he thinks he's above that now, and he honestly seems to want to try to get the titular priest to come around and see things the way he does.
Right.
Um, and you know, you can say that uh, the way things ended up for the titular priest, uh, he came out. You could say he came out looking the worse for it because he's dead already and so young, and uh, some might argue without having really accomplished anything at all. But
I
I
wouldn't
think
say that, but yeah.
I know
Yeah.
you wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. The world would say that,
Yes, true, yeah.
and I think, uh, if I may, I think Bernanos is straightforwardly inviting readers to see that that's really not the case at all. That in fact, it is the titular priest who, in all of his suffering and in his apparent lack of accomplishment or meaningful anything in what he did in his life, that he actually did so much,
Yeah.
and and almost at all times, really, at least as it's portrayed in the book.
Yeah, and there's even like I think that goes exactly to what you're talking about because the very last piece in the book is addressed as a letter from Monsignor Louis de Freddy. Um, and maybe that's just a formality, but I get the impression that the priest, his last moments there with his friend there with de Freddy, may have brought him back to the priesthood somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a fair
It's
point.
possible, you know.
It's definitely something to think about because in asking his friend to perform last rites, he's that's definitely that's easy to treat as a very overt invitation to come back to what you left.
Yeah, and the guy's literally dying in front of you too. Like it's very realistic to believe. Well, I mean, if you're gonna have a moment in your life that suddenly changes your outlook on things, that's gonna be one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I can't tie this in cleanly, but I still want to mention it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, so if we're not going to worry about spoilers, and we're not because that's the only
Already.
way we
Yeah.
can have a really fun discussion.
Yeah.
Uh, so the priest dies of stomach cancer specifically,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a number of places in the novel where he says that basically the only thing he can stomach is bread and wine,
Yeah.
and I'm sure this wasn't lost on you. You know, the author just really wants us to get that the only way the priest is able to keep on going is uh, through the body and blood of Christ alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. That's all that keeps him going, and it's we certainly see it to be so. And you know, I don't I don't I don't want to hear it suggested that, well, it's the body and blood of Christ that killed him, but
Nah.
no, that's the only thing that kept him alive so long.
Exactly. Yeah.
The doctor says when he said when the doctor tells him he has stomach cancer, he says, "It's amazing you've persisted this long." Like, and I think that should be understood in that light. The body and blood symbolism. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And also, this this might be grasping at straws here, but stomach cancer. Yeah, the stomach's on the side of your abdomen, and he was talking about how much it hurts in the side of his abdomen. I don't know. That seemed rather appropriate too. Yeah,
yeah.
being pierced there, perhaps. Uh, but
I didn't think of that.
yeah, I was just looking up real quick, but the stomach's on the opposite side of the body. It's never said in scripture which side he was pierced by, but it's usually considered to have been his right side. That's not the side that the stomach's on, but like I said, maybe grasping at straws. Anyway, the important part is what you've already just said.
That is an interesting thought that hadn't even occurred to me. Um,
It occurred to me
since I'm
because I've had stomach pain in the past. It's like right in the side
oh,
of your abdomen. It's nothing serious. It was just like indigestion or whatever. But
I
it's
see.
like right in the side of your body. Like imagine having to live with something like that, except a lot worse. And then you're spewing up blood and you can't eat anything, and it's like, that sounds horrible. That sounds nightmarish. And
Yeah.
Bernanos does a good job putting you into that nightmare as the priest.
Yeah. And since I'm determined to keep this theme going through the end, I will just say that since we are talking about the end, basically,
Mm-hmm.
I believe what Bernanos wants to make plain throughout the novel is that uh, even as almost everyone in the novel is depicted as drowning in despair, not least our titular priest,
Mm.
what Bernanos wants to show is that God has not abandoned the world at large or the priest in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And, the priest makes abundantly plain throughout his diary that um, he's lost for large swaths of the novel even the spirit of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
He can't even bring himself to pray, or if he can pray, he feels like his heart's not really in it.
Yeah.
But even with that being the case, he's still clinging to some naked reality of of Christ that he is staking himself on, and in so doing, God does use him to bless those around him. And there's a particular passage immediately following the death of the Countess, or either right before or after it, that captures it very well. Oh, miracle! Thus to be able to give what we ourselves do not possess.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet miracle of our empty hands. Hope which was shriveling in my heart, flowered again in hers. The spirit of prayer which I thought lost in me forever was given back to her by God, and, who can tell, perhaps in my name. Lord, I am stripped bare of all things, as you alone can strip us bare, whose fearful care nothing escapes, nor your terrible love.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I, I'm saying, I'm quoting this because I think that's essentially the upshot of the novel. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and you know, if if this were an Ingmar Bergman movie, I think the upshot probably would have been just a little bit different and a lot less hopeful.
Yes.
But this is Bernanos, who is was a believer, and that's his upshot here, and it's one that I think anyone who reads it will be blessed with.
Yeah. What I would say is that this is a look at Catholicism, a look at belief from Calvary. Like, you what sometimes I don't know. I might be speaking out of turn here, but what did he see suspended from the cross, right?
Yes.
And I think Diary of a Country Priest illustrates a lot of that pretty well. Of what would otherwise be a totally hopeless situation, yeah, like a world drowning in despair, and this book does a really great job at depicting that, um, but depicting that not from the people that are drowning. Even though the priest is one of those people, he's he's holding on to the lifeline, even when he's blinded and doesn't necessarily know that he's still holding on to that lifeline. And
Yeah,
that's a lot of what faith is, I think.
that's the that's the great uproarious joke or punchline of the entire novel. If you really want to know, I think you know the priest is so bad off in a lot of ways, but because of what you just said, he's still better off than almost everyone else in the novel
Yeah,
just by virtue of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
He still has something to hope. He still has something he hopes in,
Yes,
even even as he's having to work so hard still to hope.
yeah. His eyes are still set on the transcendental.
and and in in with that in mind, I don't really believe that the world depicted in the novel is any different from the world we live in now.
Arguably, the world we live in now might even be further on down the road.
Yeah, I mean the circumstances are obviously different in many particulars and details, but uh, I think most ordinary people, underneath a lot of superfluities and uh, obscurances, are in much the same situation. Many of them, perhaps most of them.
I mean, yeah, definitely. Speaking in terms of the, at least from my position in the Catholic Church, looking around at fellow Catholics, both in the traditional Latin Mass movement, if there is such a thing, as well as more broadly speaking, yeah, I think the church is slowly starting, and not maybe not the ecclesiastical hierarchy. We'll find out eventually, but at least the laymen, the lay people, and COVID, I think, did a lot for this. Is starting to really move out of a slumber that it's been in for the last. We want the trad in me wants to say since Vatican II, but the reality is for the last real like century and a half probably, and uh, you the whole joke of Catholicism nowadays is that you're baptized Catholic, you're confirmed, and then you never go back to church. And chances are you were probably confirmed, if you were confirmed, and you don't remember anything about catechesis, and you went to Catholic school, and so you're an expert on Catholicism, and you practice, birth control. So, like, that's what the church is in most of people who are not Catholic or people who even are Catholic. That's sort of what they believe that the church is nowadays, and it's like that's not even close to a representation of what it's supposed to be. So reading this and seeing that here's this priest who's struggling with all the same stuff, and Bernanos obviously living through that period in time is illustrating what he's seeing around him with this book. It's like, yeah, it's the church was doing not great back then. It's doing much worse now, but it's dealing with all the same problems. Um, so yeah, effectively that.
On that note, we can't talk about it this time, but as I think about it, it'd be really nice if we could talk about it some other time. There is a film that was released in 2014 that is simply titled Calvary. Are you familiar with it?
I am. I didn't see it, but it looked really good. It did that have Hoffman in it? Seymour Hoffman? No, it didn't. It had
Brendan Gleeson.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That looked good. That one looked good. And then I was gonna mention another one that I also haven't seen that was supposed to have been good that had Ethan Hawke. It was more recent. Um, uh, first,
First Reformed.
first Reformed was supposed to have been good. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it was good.
I have not seen First Reformed, but I have seen Calvary, and I'm bringing it up because, at the risk of oversimplification, I think in a lot of ways, Calvary is essentially the Diary of a Country Priest, but in modern Ireland.
Oh man, that's dark.
Um, so I'm mentioning it because I think if you were to watch it sometime,
I
we
hope I
could have a
can.
real
Yeah.
we could have a really great time talking about it, and perhaps drawing some connections to the Diary of a Country Priest, and also talking about meaningful differences. So I just
Sure.
wanted to mention that while we're having this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I'll see what I can do. That sounds like a great idea.
Unlike the decades old movie that's out of print, this one you should be able to readily stream.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold out hope that Criterion Collection will usually reissue stuff that's in their catalog and make a big deal about it. So hopefully, because you and I have shown an interest in this, somehow statistically that'll hit some algorithm in the ether that will prompt whoever is in charge of that catalog to be like, hey, we should reissue this now, July something, it's out. Let's hope. Probably not going to happen.
We're gonna have to do big numbers, I think, for that to happen in this particular episode.
Just machine learning. It'll just be jumbled up in some algorithm. I don't know.
It will make its way.
But yeah. Anyway, that was a good conversation. We didn't talk about other stuff that was in the book. There's a lot in this book, and even though we spoiled stuff, I do want to say anybody who's listening, go read it. It's really good, very easy to read, and it's fantastic. There's a lot of stuff in this. There's a lot of really cool stuff where like the priest seems like he's losing his mind, and that stuff really had me going because man, he's writing stuff that's like you feel it. It's like I've been there. He's going even deeper than whatever I've dealt with or whatever.
Yeah,
everybody kind of feels that.
Don't imagine for a second that we exhaustively covered everything that's in the book.
No, we only covered like three things.
that's one of the things that I've always been struck by whenever I've read or looked through this book, and I was struck by it again, is how unbelievably rich it is. Just like every single page. This whole novel is just insight after insight after insight.
Yeah.
And it just never stops. It's overwhelming. It just everything that is being said is just worth pondering at length. It's incredible. It's one of the most incredible novels I've ever read.
Yeah, really dense. I look forward to reading it again, probably in a few years. Let it sit for a bit. But yeah, great stuff. So I think that's going to draw this episode to a close. Do you have any more thoughts to add to Diary of a Country Priest?
I don't think so, but I really enjoyed what we got to talk about, and thank you for taking the time to read the book so we could do it.
Oh man, not a problem. It's been on my list forever, and this was the excuse to actually get to it. Great stuff. All right, we're going to call this where it is. Everybody have a good week. Take it easy.
Take care.